Hey guys, all right, so I wanted to move on to this new build that I found. We had seen Cryptarian's guide to a minion Necromancer, and he had mentioned a Blood Mist build in like as he was sort of comparing different builds and their damage. He had mentioned a Blood Mist build that was basically invulnerable. So I scoured around a little bit and I found this build, and I think this is probably what he was talking about. If anything, this might be an improvement on what he had seen, because again, this video is basically saying how it's an improvement on the Blood Mist build. So this is the game-changing Necromancer Discovery, a new best build and more, basically a build guide.
Gaming, my name is
From Rage Gaming Videos. And yeah, let's just go ahead, jump in, see what it's all, what it's all about, So
Hello and welcome back to Raise Gaming. My name is Hollow, and today I have an awesome update for you. The recent amazing Shadow Mist build that's taken the Necromancer community by storm has been an incredible addition to our meta builds. Its ability to clear packs of mobs smoothly and effectively, while pretty much next to completely immune to damage, thanks to Blood Mist combined with Lucky Hit and Decrepify, massively reducing the cooldowns, well, that's made it a top tier pick for pushing Nightmare Dungeon tiers. There is a noticeable downside. Anytime you face a big elite or boss on their own, you no longer have multiple targets to rely on. Less corpses and less cooldown resetting means a massive drop off in your DPS. So basically, single target is a big weakness of the build. What if we could change that? We could keep the survivability, the iframe DPS, the incredible mob clear, but simply scale its more reliable damage. Well, with this updated version, I'm confident we found a way. As you can see, instead of hitting measly 50k hits or so, we can hit towards 1 million. Smooth 700k pops, followed by 500k, 300.
to be honest, this is not even the strongest. I've seen some footage of a bone spear necro just hitting for millions per shot. So if you weren't trying to be like super cookie cutter, this would be sort of an alternative, I think. I mean, I myself, would be disappointed without having minions, but at the same time, having a death essentially themed mage seems pretty cool.
100k and so on, pretty much smashing the target per multiple ticks a second. This is significantly improved DPS, and ultimately means we are now able to tackle those solo enemies, be it elite or boss, much more effectively. But also, the mob clear. It's so much better thanks to the high crit and the consistent DPS. We're not always going to need a ton of mobs to get this going. It just helps with CDR and so on. But how did I make this stronger? It comes from crit. We just weren't leaning into that enough. There's two sides of Necromancer that are ridiculously strong that it's just impossible to ignore in any build at this point. Firstly, when you sacrifice Iron Golem, you deal 30% times increased critical strike damage. Just this specific sacrifice means any crit build for a Necromancer is going to be ridiculously high in potential. Combine that with the Grasping Veins aspect, meaning you can gain up to 20% increased critical strike for 6 seconds whenever you cast Corpse Tendrils, and then up to 60% times bonus crit strike damage to enemies damaged by those tendrils. Well, those two details combine into this ridiculously high crit damage that Necromancer has as a whole. Whether you're Bone Spear, Bone Spirit, even the Blood Surge build I did relies on high crit through these means. By not having these, it's just a mistake. And this enhances all of your damage. Your shadow damage, your shadow over time with Shadow Blight, that scales your damage big as well. And that's benefiting from the higher crit chance and crit damage. We've also worked in more damage via stunned targets, such as those stunned by Grasping Veins, but other potential stuns from shadow damage itself or Decrepify and more. Also, we've made it so the cursed targets of Decrepify, they're taking more damage in this version as well. There's got to be a cost though. We've had to get some points from somewhere, right? Well, we've scaled back our initial Corpse Explosion damage to create more DPS around over time for consistency, and we've also pulled back on, say, in the talent tree, Corpse Tendril levels, because we just don't need the CDR on that. For the Decrepifiers, resetting it pretty much instantly anyway. For now though, let's just get into it, beginning with the talents in the Book of the Dead. For the talents then, let me just quickly scroll down so you can see every individual point and where it's been.
So before we get into that, just from watching that footage, that looked pretty fun, honestly. Running around, blood misting yourself so you're like invulnerable. It just looked like, and the damage output was also insane. So it looks really fun.
been spent. Then you can refer to that if you want to all at once. First up though, the first 2 points do not matter. The basic skill, we are not using this in this version of the build.
Typical.
I just put it into Reap as a filler.
Basic
Then we come to
skills,
core
just like a
skills,
throwaway skill.
where we're picking up 1 level of Blight and getting some contribution levels from items. We enhanced that for the slow, which is nice, but mainly about supernatural Blight. When we applied Blight to a target, we deal 15% times increased damage. So there's a massive multiplier to our damage. We want to make sure that whatever we're bursting, especially single target or big elites, they have this on them at all times. Or when we pull in and stack a big pile of mobs together, they're standing in a Blight. Then 3 out of 3 huge flesh. As always, we need to be spawning corpses. This is just how to do it. Also, we benefit a lot in this build with Lucky Hit, so our chances are even higher. Then we come down to the next tier. We are 5 out of 5 on Blood Mist still, of course. We're going to reduce the cooldown of that as much as possible, and we're enhancing it and going to Ghastly Blood Mist to make it so it's consistently spawning corpses. Then we are 5 out of 5 on Corpse Explosion with loads of item contribution to increase its damage and enhance it for the explosion range, and still Blighted Corpse Explosion to get our damage into shadow damage. Then we have a filler point spent in Grim Harvest. It's nice that Corpse Explosion generates essence, but it's not that important for this build. Fueled by
That was one thing I didn't really pay too much attention to, was the fact that you only really need 1 point in the consuming a corpse for the essence regen. I was throwing in 3 points, but I started off using Bone Spear, and that does use up a lot of essence. But nowadays we barely use any essence for the build that we've been using. And you know, looking at this, it looks like it might be the same sort of situation where Corpse Explosion does not cost any essence. So, you know, just with 1 point in the consuming a corpse perk, you're you know, refilling essence pretty quickly. I think maybe Blood Mist might consume it. I know Bone Storm does as well. So, but they would be very small and they have high cooldown. So, and also Blight, I guess. Blight does have consumption, but to the extent at which you actually need to refill your essence, I very much overestimated that. So it's nice to see that, because that liberates, you know, basically 2 points back to other things.
Death is the vital one. 9% times increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse is amazing. I'm also getting 1 level from an item, which gets it to 12% times, which is awesome. Next, we have the Decrepify tree, where we're cursing a target with Decrepify, meaning it deals 20% less damage to us and slows it, which is awesome. It has a chance to stun it as well with Lucky Hit, and further with Lucky Hit, with Abhorrent Decrepify, it might...
This game is based on Lucky Hit. Like, it's crazy how many skills need Lucky Hit, and if you don't have that, then it's just like a lot of these just don't even like trigger. Going into this game, I was just not expecting that. It's a very interesting development.
Might reduce the cooldowns, which is how we're resetting Bone Storm and Blood Mist really effectively in groups. We only put 1 level into Decrepify, but I'm getting a random level from an item. And now we were actually leveling Amplify damage. 9% times increased damage to all cursed enemies, and we should be applying Decrepify to everything always, so they're all cursed. That's just a major damage increase compared to the original build. We're still going 3 out of 3 on Death's Embrace, making close enemies take more damage and deal less to us, which is a very nice combination. And then we come down to where we have Corpse Tendrils. We put 1 level in this now. When you level this up, it means the damage is slightly better, but it's irrelevant damage, and it reduces the cooldown, which is nice, but thanks to Lucky Hit and Decrepify, we're instantly resetting this anyway. It's not worth putting points into. I did talk about this in the first video, and yeah, it was exactly what I expected. In any case, we will, of course, enhance it so we can get to played Corpse Tendrils, which is how we're getting vulnerable damage in the build, which is really important.
Corpse Tendrils is just, hands down, my favorite skill for Necromancer. I feel like it's needed in every build, because if you can gather up everyone, you make them vulnerable. You can then nuke them either with Corpse Explosion or like Spirit Bomb or whatever that the other one is, or even just lancing them with the Bone Spear. Like, it's just so effective at what it does. Also, like, it gathers all your minions in one spot, so it's like it's better able to direct, you know, where you want your guys to actually go. And for a minion build, that is one of the more frustrating parts of it. So it just helps so much.
Then we have the amazing shadow-based passives. Reaper's Pursuit gives us movement speed with darkness skills. Gloom majorly stacks the damage of shadow damage, which is amazing. And then Terror causes up to an 18% increase times bonus damage to those that are stunned and immobilized, and still a benefit to anyone that are slowed, which is all the targets from Decrepify and our gear. One little level into Crippling Darkness also means our darkness skills might stun, which increases our damage. Then we come down to the ultimate tree where we're still picking up Bone Storm, which is giving us a massive damage reduction, dealing damage over time to those that are near us, and of course the 20% crit strike chance while active. Bone Storm is just too good not to have in most builds at this point. Of course, we're also not using minions, so we're using standalone for the damage.
Like, you know, between Bone Storm and Raise the Dead ultimate, Bone Storm is just hands down or utilitarian, like effective. Like, just keeps you safe, gives everyone in, you know, all of your minions and you better crit chance and the damage reduction. It's just such a like a perfect kind of spell.
Damage reduction and the sacrifice bonuses with the following points. Lastly, of course, we're still using Shadow Blight, which is the key to how we're dealing damage over time through our shadow damage, and largely why we want to make sure all of our abilities are dealing some kind of shadow damage. Now it's time for the Book of the Dead. For the Skeletal Warriors, I'm still going for the massive increase to shadow damage, meaning Reaper's Sacrifice. For the Mages, it's still Cold. For the Vulnerable, massive damage increase. And lastly, for Golems, of course, it's the Iron Golem for the massive crit damage increase. Here we go then on the Paragon board, which has slightly changed, but not by a massive amount, which we'll go over. Just so you can see all of the Paragon boards individually though, here's a zoom on the starter board, which is using the exploit glyph. Then I'll move up to the second board, where you can see the second glyph, which is control. This board is the Wither board, and there's a look at the full board, so you can see where I spent my points. Then we come over to the next board, which is the Flesh Eater board. This board uses the glyph Territorial, and you can see how I've spent my points there as we move to the fourth board, and the last board, which is the Scent of Death board. This is where I've spent all my points so far, but I'm at the point where I'm just kind of filling it in with the points I'm getting, as I'm now level 84, and the glyph in there is the Darkness glyph. To begin with, we're going to come up to the right, picking up the Prime Rare Node, and then come up to the glyph in the center like so, which is where we pick up Exploit. Exploit is perfect because, you know, it's easy to get active with the 25 dex in the first board, and when you get that active, it's going to increase your vulnerable damage to 10% times on all vulnerable targets. This is a major source of our damage in this build, and it's kind of one that a lot of builds are using for good reason. I found it to be simply more effective than Scourge, which we were previously using, which would increase the damage we deal with shadow damage over time, which is nice, but the fact is Vulnerable seems to be a much better damage multiplier. Absolutely. So enhancing that has seemed to make a bigger difference for me. In any case, we're going to pick up Vulnerable and activate that by picking up the dex around it, like so, as you can see. And then I came back to this board later when I upgraded this to level 15 to get it to higher dex to improve that further. If you're min-maxing and you aren't quite as high level as me, then I would just activate the secondary effect by picking up enough dex, picking up both of the rare nodes, and coming out of it on the left side, where we come to our next board, and where we pick up the legendary node Wither as a board. To begin with, we'll move straight to the right to go activate the glyph, picking up the rare node Malediction on the way. The glyph in this case is Control, which requires 40 intelligence, so you want this level 15 as soon as possible to make this more possible. Slowed or chilled enemies take 10% times increased damage, amazing, especially with the build we'll talk about, or double that for stunned or frozen enemies, which is insane. Since we're constantly corpse tendriling all targets, this is just unbelievably strong. In any case, we pick up intelligence around the board and a bunch of the magic nodes. Then we will leave via the left side to work our way up towards the legendary node. On the way, we'll pick up Lingering Shadows and a bunch of magic nodes, and move our way over to Dragging Shadows and the magic nodes around that, then finally move up to the legendary node to get that active, massively enhancing the shadow damage potential we have in this shadow damage based build. Back to the glyph then, we will now leave the board by going straight up, coming around to the left to activate Gnawing Darkness, which as you can see I'm still filling out, finishing off the magic nodes with the few points that I'm still waiting on. This is something you can ignore if you're struggling for points for a little bit, but then we can come out to the right and go to our third board, which is still the Flesh Eater board. A major damage increase when we consume 5 corpses, and in this build we're consuming 5 corpses instantly thanks to our weapon unique, perfect synergy with a massive damage increase. We'll move from this board straight to the right and come up from the bottom to the glyph like so, where we put in Territorial. This is a major damage reduction to all enemies that are close to us, and increases our damage in a different way by increasing damage to close enemies, doubling up on damage and survivability in a major way. We activate this as much as we can with the 25 dex easy requirement by picking up the nodes, lots of magic nodes around that like so, including the targeted node, which I still need to activate by getting more dex. Then we can come down and actually pick up the legendary node as well, making our way down to the Stifle rare node, and then eventually coming down to the new board.
Hey Minotaur, no cute farming simulator. Yeah, well, we're winding it down. Uh, Finishing up. I wanted to check out this build for the cute demon farming simulator. Wanted to figure out how I could farm more efficiently, more effectively. But so that's what we're doing. One thing I wanted to say though for this, and away from your diverting away from your point, is this would be a very effective build. I think for even minion builds. I mean, clearly you're gonna have to put different points into the skill tree, but the Paragon board at least would be very effective, I think, for most minion builds that I've seen for Necromancer. So that's an interesting point, I think.
Our final board, which again is still Sense of Death. This is where I'm spending the minimal amount of points to get this activated, and over the next 16 levels, I'll be fleshing this out by picking up more rare nodes and magic nodes in general. In any case, we work our way down the board, making our way as quick as we can to pick up the Scent of Death node. This works as a permanent 15% damage reduction because we always have corpses nearby, but if there are no corpses, it's a pretty big damage increase, which is nice. Everyone's doing this for the fourth board because there's not really a better option in many builds. In any case, from here, we make our way down and to the left and work our way over to the glyph where, as I've said, we've got darkness. This requires 25 willpower to activate the secondary effect, and it just means when we deal shadow damage, enemies will deal up to 10% less damage for 5 seconds as it stacks up. So a large source of our damage is shadow damage. This is going to increase it, and it's also at the same time going to give us some very nice damage reduction. We get this activated as a priority with a 25 willpower, as shown here, and then work our way up and down to pick up both the rare nodes and get those activated just for their small perks. But like I said, this is where most of my points will end up going in the future levels while I still am finishing off the other boards. Now it's time for the important one, the equipment and how this is being achieved. First up, you'll see I'm still using Black River.
That outfit is so cool, I have to say. This is so legit. I can't wait to get those kind of pieces.
Which is ultimately a really important point of this build. It's going to massively improve the damage of your corpse explosions. It's also going to increase the radius, which is a major quality of life and general DPS benefit. And because it means you consume up to 5 corpses at once, that's going to trigger the Paragon legendary node, Corpse Eater, triggering all 5 corpses at once to have that permanent massive damage increase a lot more smoothly in your gameplay. This synergizes in a perfect way with the explosive mist aspect, causes your blood mist to detonate corpses it goes near. So with this unique, you're able to detonate 5 corpses at once, and with this passive, you're able to detonate them while in iframes. This
and then you have the other upgrade to Blood Mist where you actually spawn corpses. So I mean, that's just pairs so well.
It's incredible synergy and largely the quality of life style of the gameplay. If you did not have this unique, there is another consideration. It would mean you could put on an offensive aspect, such as, hey, the Grasping Veins aspect. That would free up 1 slot for an offensive aspect. The aspect in that case that I've been thinking about is the Retribution aspect, meaning you may deal up to 40% times increased damage to stunned enemies. This will not really help you in boss fights because in most cases they're going to be dead before they're ever stunned, but it would increase the damage there massively if you're in a party, can stun the boss before it dies, but ultimately it will massively improve your mob clear because yeah, you'll be stunning those all the time. The potential is amazing with this, but you'd be losing the incredible quality of life and benefits of being iframe and doing so much damage and spreading your shadow, which in turn crits and spreads Shadow Blight and so on. So it's really a point of contention, but there's an alternative way to use this build if you do not have Black River, and that's by using Corpse Tendrils and Retribution aspects, which we can't fit in the build really with Black River. With that explained then, we still have Black River as our main weapon. We're using Explosive Mist to trigger. On our chest, we still have Disobedience, the most generic and OP defensive aspect in the game. Massive.
Just got that today, and I need to put it on something immediately. I've been kind of avoiding trying to sacrifice a chest piece or some other piece for it, but I really do need it.
Improving your armor as you deal damage and basically generating incredible survivability for any build that runs this. As you've seen, on my gloves, I have the offensive aspect, Grasping Veins. You want this as high roll as possible. It is a major aspect of how you deal damage in this build. Previously, we were using Howl from Below, which has amazing lucky hit aspects and chance on itself, and increases the corpse explosion damage by a massive amount. However, it just does not compete to the outrageous crit damage we're getting from this, which is the major crux of the build. build. For the legs, we're still going Shielding Storm, just for the nice barrier on Bone Storm. We're using that no matter what anyway, so it just makes that ability even better, providing you with a barrier. On the boots, we are no longer using the Ghost Walk aspect, because I actually have them, the Penitent Greaves. This is what's leaving that trail of frost behind that's chilling enemies. That's nice because it's causing a permanent slow. But the benefit here, it means we can deal up to 10% times more damage to chilled enemies. Basically, for Necromancer, getting a aspect that's going to increase your damage on your boots is next to impossible. This is the best way to do it, and I'm so glad I finally have this unique. As mentioned earlier, we're using control in our Paragon, and as you can see, you deal 10% times increased damage to slowed or chilled enemies. While it's true most enemies
I was wondering why that was so important. And then I didn't realize the Crepify. I'll let him finish, but
always going to be slowed by Decrepify anyway. This gives us a way to permanently have.
I didn't realize that through the Paragon board you were chilling. So I felt like I was like, okay, well, 10% boost, I guess, or 8% in this case. The chilled enemies it's okay, but like, you know, you want that to be like additive with the other sort of damage that you're doing.
Have that effect and bonus without using any resources, raw damage increase, and permanent slow. What an awesome thing. We've discussed Black River, now let's talk about the focus. This has the decay aspect on it, giving us up to 40% times improved damage to Shadow Blight's damage, stacking up to 5 times, which is obviously insane. If you are using Shadow Blight, you certainly want to be using decay, and again, the highest roll possible. Also, we use a focus in particular over, say, a shield, because this gives us a massive cooldown reduction benefit, and that's really nice for a build like this. When it comes to the rings then, first up we have the Ultimate Shadow, which is turning our Bone Storm into a Darkness skill, which is causing Shadow Blight, and that's amazing. Then we have Blood Soaked still, which is leaving a trail of shadow damage after we move around with Blood Mist, further causing Shadow Blight and the massive damage. What an amazing ability. And lastly, Blighted aspect, meaning we deal up to 180% times increased damage for 6 seconds after the Shadow Blight key passive damages an enemy 10 times. As we're ticking that damage loads and loads, it basically skyrockets the DPS, and that's why we want it on the amulet, because we want this effect to be as high as possible. But let's quickly explain the affixes on the gear. Your priority is going to be lucky hit chance. That is because we're going to be getting lucky hit benefits from the Crepify, like stun, and like the cooldown reduction, which is majorly
between this and Crypt's build, and it would be interesting to explore the Bone Spear build, because I haven't really looked too much into that. I wouldn't be surprised if that one included Lucky Hit as being sort of the key mechanic, but just both these so far, the Crypt minion and then this one, have both been really dependent on Lucky Hit. It kind of sucks to whittle down the game to one sort of important aspect, but at the same time, it's nice and simple, which is nice. So I'll have to keep my eye out for more Lucky Hit stuff.
Important for the build. It's super important then on your gloves, since we're no longer using Howl from Below, to get yourself some lucky hit chance there, because you're losing some not having Howl from Below. So lucky hit is ultimately the priority in this build. Then, as always, you crit strike damage and crit strike chance. You want both of those as much as possible. I will prioritize strike chance to get you near enough to 100% crit strike chance all the time. After that, it's any way you can improve the damage of the build, improving your damage to those that are close to you, affected by shadow damage over time, or shadow damage as a whole. Anything that can improve the all-important vulnerable damage or crowd control enemies, these are all amazing. For utility, I would recommend stat improvements such as intelligence ideally, or all stats. Dex and willpower are fine, but you don't want any strength. Cooldown reduction and move speed are also amazing. And then when it comes to damage reduction, you want straight armor and max health as priority. Behind that, raw damage reduction, these are top tier defensive affixes, but then general stuff like damage reduction from close enemies and far enemies are also very good. In the case of this build, damage reduction from enemies that are already affected by shadow damage over time is perfect synergy and usually rolls pretty well. For the gems, as you can see throughout, I'm still using rubies for max life on the armor. In weapons, we're using amethysts, or the purple ones, for the extra damage over time, and then finally the skulls in the jewelry for the armor value. While we're here, why don't we explain how to play the build, in case you haven't seen the first video. Essentially, you want to apply Decrepify to everything you ever see, even more so in this version of the build, because it's going to increase your damage, not just make them deal less damage to you. And also reduce the cooldown on your abilities. The more targets hit by Decrepify, the better. Then we need corpses ASAP. The guaranteed way to do this is use Blood Mist, because it's going to spawn them behind you and you're going to pop them. It always leaves at least one behind at the end that won't be popped, which is a perfect target for corpse tendrils.
And it's really nice to have a guaranteed way to generate a corpse, because usually usually you're relying on the damage that you do, and it's like a at max, like, you know, for the skill, it's a 12% chance every time you do damage to actually spawn a corpse, but you know, it's not super reliable. And I don't, that might be a lucky hit as well, as far as I'm recalling, but it's not super reliable. So you can end up sitting there trying to, you know, generate a corpse, but Blood Mist gives you that corpse right away. It's a very nice way to do it that I hadn't thought about. But yeah, I mean, usually, I mean, this is operating on pretty much a general principle. I think is, you know, decrepify stuff and then look for a corpse. I mean, bone spear builds are going to be very different, I think, but because they're, you know, relying on bone spear and then we're just basically regenerating your essence. Whereas minion builds or this build, you know, are relying on corpses, especially for corpse tendrils and corpse explosions. So, yeah, pretty cool.
Bone Storm to give ourselves massive crit strike chance. The tendrils will massively improve our damage through causing vulnerability, through spiking our crit chance and crit damage. We can shoot a blight at the now stacked up group of enemies to cause them to take more damage from us. And then we can just blood mist straight through them again to pop loads of corpses, deal damage, and be completely immune to damage. If for some reason your blood mist is not available immediately, just start spamming corpse explosions and spread blight amongst the enemies. It's simple and it's very, very effective. But there you have it. The updated version of the Shadow Mist build, now improved with massive crit chance and crit damage potential. One thing I want to mention is there is the aspect of Might, which actually reduces the damage you take for up to 6 seconds with the top roll after you use a basic attack like Reap. If you were pushing really true endgame stuff, like mega high tier nightmare dungeons, it could be a good idea to work that into the build, reducing your damage output slightly, working in more survivability. But since there's literally no reason to push high tiers other than for the fun of it, I prefer the more damaging one while I'm leveling to 100. In any case, if you've enjoyed the video, do drop a like on it. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Josh,
Cool. That was a great video.